so we can use this later on. So just as an introduction, obviously my name is Jonathan Cohn. I'm starting an interview series for Progressive Mass, where we talk about the kind of short-term and long-term responses necessary to the current pandemic and like economic fallout, and how it highlights so many of the existing inequalities in our system, and kind of how much change is needed, especially for how we rebuild afterwards. It's my pleasure to have today Zach Beers and Amy Blanchette from PHENOM. Hopefully I didn't butcher your names. Can you guys just introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what PHENOM does?
Amy.
Okay, I'll go first. So I'm Amy Blanchette from Fall River, she, her, hers. I am currently the president of the board of PHENOM, which stands for Public Higher Education Network of Massachusetts. I am a graduate of Bristol Community College, and I currently work at Bristol Community College in the Office of Student and Family Engagement. And my job there, I do get to run a lot of fun events, but the main point of my job is to help students who struggle with the most basic needs being met, because we all know that that is why students struggle to graduate. It's not, because of their courses or their professors. More often than not, it's because they're struggling with food insecurity and housing and homelessness and things of that nature. So that's a big part of my job. I also serve on various boards in the city, such as Flint Neighborhood Association, the Lafayette Durfee House, which is the oldest living history museum in the city, built circa 1750. I do historical reenactment in my free time with what little free time I have. I've served on the board of Health First Fall River, which helps undocumented people and low-income people who do not have health insurance get their most basic healthcare needs met. I also serve on the board of Toastmasters, which helps people with public speaking, and Groundwork South Coast, which helps engage young students in sustainability in their future, and also sustainability justice.
Nice.
Environmental justice, I should say. I'm sorry.
an impressive list. And Zach, can you introduce yourself to us as well?
Yeah, Zach Beers. I'm the executive director of PHENOM, and I'm a city councilor in Medford. He, him pronouns. And similar to Amy, I think we're just seeing whatever we're doing, no matter what we're involved in, the impacts of this are everywhere.
Yeah, and so like where I live in Boston, I live near a number of colleges, and then saw kind of a few weeks ago when you had a number of the schools in Boston and around the state just telling students, sorry, we're kicking you off campus, we're putting courses online, figure it out. So I'm curious to hear like some of the students you work with, like how are they adjusting to that kind of just like a rapid, kind of this like rapid shift that they're having to grapple with, and the demands placed on them by the school, which students have varying abilities to actually kind of meet.
Yeah, so it's really difficult, and I can talk more just in general when I'm hearing, and Amy's really there firsthand, and it's been really difficult across the board. PHENOM focuses on public colleges, our community colleges, state universities, UMass, but it's true for the private colleges too. I think everyone's having a really difficult time losing housing, losing food access. There's a lot of students facing homelessness and food insecurity, and so that's been a major issue that we've been trying to advocate for. There have been some rebates and refunds, which have been good, but that still doesn't mean that everyone who needs to be on campus or stay on campus is there. So, it's created, I think, a really difficult learning environments for a lot of students. And, that's some of the stuff that we've been advocating for around academic support, academic equity, and also the financial side of just what just being displaced from a campus can do. And then again, I know community colleges, I'm sure Amy will speak to it, they're doing it, you might not have dorms on campus, but you're doing direct service on campus. So there's a lot of disruption there as well. And for the workers as well, who some of whom are maybe don't even have safe conditions right now.
Right. Amy, were you
Right.
tagging? Because
Yes.
we were talking before about just before this chat about like the food bank, I believe it was that you're working with, and just kind of seeing how much economic insecurity the student population has right now.
So Fall River is the poorest city in southeastern Massachusetts, first of all. We do participate in a mobile food market every month with a big help from the Greater Boston Food Bank. And we are the largest mobile food market that they have. And when we first started 7 years ago, we were serving about 100 people. We're now up to, we just did 403 people today. More than half of those were students, and we had about 50 staff and faculty as well. And so many people that were just thanking us and so grateful to have food. I think of, one of my organizer at Bristol with me, Cameron Costa. He's working right now at Taunton State Hospital, and he's working 60 plus hours a week. He pays for his education solely by himself, and he's struggling to keep up with his online classes. It's a real struggle for him working, 60 plus hours a week. I'm hearing a lot from students in terms of just getting used to online classes and remote work. That's been an incredible struggle for so many of them. There are a lot of students who still don't have Wi-Fi. The school did supply computers and Chromebooks for those who needed them. However, since kids are out of school, we have a lot of parents, a lot of non-traditional students who are also homeschooling their kids at the same time. So they're trying to share computers and Wi-Fi, and that slows things down. So there's a lot of struggle right now. I'm seeing it, in a lot of the Facebook groups that I'm in for Bristol students, and we have a Bristol Community College app. So I see a lot of the students' complaints. A lot of them want a pass-fail grade, and right now Bristol is not offering that due to the faculty contracts and the faculty having to agree for a bargaining agreement. Right now the answer is we can't do that this year, but we'll work on it for next year, which isn't a good enough excuse for a lot of the students, and a lot of them have taken already to go into the president, and so we'll see how that's going to go. So that's how. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, one thing that kind of what you were talking about reminds me of how I feel like one thing that often gets left out of discussions at campuses is that many students have jobs on campus as well, and so like that's something that like in a time when it's like not only you have this period where like they're paying for an education that they aren't getting in full capacity, and then losing out on some of the jobs related to the campus that they might have been working on to help pay for the education they're not getting in full.
Yeah.
Well, we got lucky there. Our work study students are still being paid. And we've only asked them to do some minimal work like social media posting and things like that, at least for my department. So they are still being paid. Thank God.
Yeah, that's
and that's the work study, and I think there's been more support for work study students because it's a federal program and there's money behind it and all of the supports there. There's a lot of students who aren't work study, and that's been a huge issue on a lot of campuses. So we've had a lot of student workers who are not being paid anymore. I know at UMass Amherst, the student workers who are even paid out of student activity fee money, so they're part of the Student Government Association or some other student agencies, they're not being paid, and that money has already been collected. It's already there, so there's not a problem with the access to the funds to pay them. There's just kind of been an arbitrary decision to stop paying. So that's been an issue as well. So we I think on all of this, pass-fail grading as well, some campuses we've had success, some campuses aren't there yet. And it's optional pass-fail, just if you're hitting circumstances. We've actually put together a really broad coronavirus set of demands for both students and workers as PHENOM. So that's been a really good thing that we've been able to do and get out there. And it's also a
little bit more about what the demands are.
Yeah, I'm actually wondering, do you think it would be possible to screen share?
If I don't know if I have it set the setting for everybody, but is it on your website? Because I could bring it up and screen share.
Yeah, it's just our website, and then there's a link right at the top. So phenomonline.org.
Yeah, let me bring it up. Okay. Yeah, I can bring. and it's the student and worker justice during the coronavirus crisis page.
Yes, yeah. So so this has been great. Sydney from PHENOM, our organizing director, excuse me, put together a great, worked with all of our student organizers on so many campuses to put together a really good set of demands. That's actually the photo that's right behind me too. And so if you go through it, excuse me, I swear it's just that I'm drinking water weird. I know you have to explain your coughs now. So there's a narrative and a series of petitions. So this is just a narrative of what's happening with workers and students. Our two main petitions are addressed to U.S. senators and representatives to cancel all of the student debt. And then also signing a petition to senators and state representatives to fully fund public colleges. So one of the big concerns, obviously, we've talked about the impact directly on students and workers currently, but another issue here is there's going to be budget cuts and lack of funding if we don't act, and that's going to kind of compound the problem. So you can see here there's a lot of demands. Top demand is in this tuition and fee justice section. Don't cut the budgets and reimburse all these emergency expenses. I read that the community college system has already spent $50 million on a transition to online learning and training. And that's just over the past 6 weeks or so. And that's a huge, huge, huge chunk of money when we're talking about the appropriation for public higher education in Massachusetts. So there's a section on just, reimbursing, keeping the campuses whole, making sure you keep paying people, and also reimbursing the room, board, housing, and tuition and fee costs. Passing the student loan borrowers bill of rights as well. That's a huge thing. So the borrowers have an option right now and someone to talk to.
Just quickly, I want to go to the point that that there are a number of students that might now be paying double rent, right? Because if you're now can't be on campus, and if it's a case where you don't have kind of a household where you're going back to stay with your parents, you might have to be paying rent for an apartment or a house or contributing for the rent back home at the same time as you're being paid for a dorm that you can't physically access.
Right. Well, two important equity things there too. One, I think for K-12 students, teens, and college students, there's a clear evidence that people are having to work and not able to spend the time on schoolwork. They're having to work to support their families. So that's a huge thing. And then second, UMass Boston just got into this business too. But I read that one of the private dorm companies for the private dorms in downtown Boston, so students who are basically in a dorm, but it's not owned by the university, it's owned by a private developer. While the students are getting, who are in the university dorms are getting a refund, the ones in the private dorm aren't. So you even have this weird thing. That's not happening as far as I know at UMass Boston. But again, when you get into this, having private dorms on public campuses or private dorms and not owned by the university, it just makes it even less accountable. That's actually in this platform towards the bottom is just decision making. Right now, a lot of things are just happening without anybody being. So students, obviously faculty and staff have bargaining and contracts, and so that gives them some power. And but in a lot of cases, kind of decisions are just being made. And again, students aren't consulted, workers aren't consulted, and that's a huge issue as well.
Yeah, and then looking at the food justice, it's striking to think of with many colleges, students will pay upfront for a semester for a meal plan, where they or their parents, whoever's paying for their college, often a mix, that are putting up money and saying yeah, I would like to eat at the dining hall on campus through the semester, and you're not paying on meal, you're paying a lump sum upfront, and that they're saying, sorry, for the rest of the semester, you can't the dining hall is closed, and so again, it's the double paying that the universities are asking students to do unless they provide appropriate refunds.
Yeah. So there's a lot in here too: health justice, housing justice, and then anything that's in purple. If you scroll up a little bit, you can see, actual petitions. So we won optional pass fail at UMass Boston. We still have a petition for Salem, and there's a lot of other things that we're planning to get up here and some other pages as well on the website. And again, I just want to really emphasize this worker safety issue. You know, there are workers, any workers. I mean, if workers aren't getting paid or have been furloughed, that needs to be fixed and rectified. But after that, you know, high-risk workers shouldn't be required to come to campus. They should have PPE and the protective equipment they need. You know, really all of the basics that we're not getting even for healthcare workers. So it's a huge issue for worker justice as well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, if I stop sharing on the page right now.
Sure.
So I want to go back to one point. You were talking about the student debt issue. And I know PHENOM does a lot of awesome work, as your pin shows, about fighting for debt-free higher education, because student debt is a major issue in Massachusetts. I remember like seeing the reports that show about just how much the mix of, let's say, the like disinvestment that's happened at the state level has sent tuition and fees for students up, and if tuition and fees for students goes up, that means debt goes up, which is a national issue. We've seen, I think, some certain members of Congress call for, let's say, different steps to kind of either freeze or kind of or other steps or other actions for student debt during this period as people are economically strained. Want to hear a little bit more about the student debt crisis in Massachusetts and what we should be doing now and what we really should have already been doing.
So maybe I can do a little bit of an explainer of actually what's out there right now, because it's been really, there have been a lot of different measures and things, and people don't really know what their rights are right now. And then I'm sure that Amy can talk about our canceling all student debt and what we think we need to do going forward. But just in terms of where we are now, so there's debt payments, and that's really the only thing that's been addressed right now by the federal bills and the stimulus is payments of debt, and even that's just certain types of student debt. So it's a lot. It's federal student debt. In almost all federal student debt, there are some federally guaranteed loans that don't qualify for this. But essentially, if you have federal student debt and you are paying it back, you should be able to log in to your servicer website, and now you should see that you're in forbearance. And what that means is that the government has actually put into place a time period for where you don't have to pay, you make your payments, and you're not collecting interest, and that's a period of 6 months. So that should be in place right now. And one of the really good things is that those 6 months still technically count towards, say you were trying to get out of default and you have to make 9 months of payments. Those 6 months actually count towards that. So this is a really good time if you are worried. Take those 6 months, then you just have to make 3 months of payments either on the back end or whenever you can, and that could be a really good way to help yourself there. And then the other thing is it also counts towards public service loan forgiveness and other types of loan forgiveness as well. So teacher loan forgiveness, for example. So that's where we are right now in terms of the federal bills. And then I think, you know, what we're demanding is obviously going further, and there has been some push to cancel student debt in the stimulus so far.
Amy, do we want to talk about like the demand to cancel student debt?
Yeah, so Zach's right on the money that it's only certain loans that they're able to pause on right now. I have gotten at least 6 emails a day from my student loan provider. I got probably 6 or 7 today already, and I only owe right now $1,500 for 2 summer classes, which, mind you, I had to drop but still ended up having to pay for because I got sick and I couldn't finish them. So yeah, only certain types of loans, which is ridiculous to me because there are so many people who are unemployed right now. Like, unemployment's at an all-time high, and to have a student loan company email you incessantly every day, you know, when you're just struggling to kind of survive, but you're in fight or flight mode, we all are really at this point right now, is pretty crazy to me. So for me, canceling all student debt, yes, you know, even though I don't have a ton of debt right now because I haven't finished UMass Dartmouth yet, but I know so many people who could benefit from it. I have a friend who works in a lawyer's office, and she was getting 4 or 5 calls a day at her place of employment to pay her student debt. You know, I mean, that's so degrading to people. And especially with the job market the way it is, with us not having enough jobs lined up for the degrees that we hold, you know, and able to make enough money just to survive, let alone to pay these debts off. You know, I mean, there's thousands of people all across Massachusetts who are struggling right now just with the basic needs. I can't even imagine having to pay a $400 or $500 loan. I have a friend who just graduated from UMass Dartmouth, and he's already gotten, he's got about $450 loan every month.
Wow.
I don't know how anybody can pay that. That's half my rent, you know?
Yeah.
That's crazy to me. People can't live like that. It's not feasible. Education is a right, and public higher education should be just as well, you know, especially with community college. I mean,
Yeah.
at this point in time, an associate's degree just doesn't get you that far, you know?
Yeah.
And there are so many people, I see a lot of students coming right out of high school, and they're struggling with their basic general education courses, and they have to keep retaking them. And that racks up their student loan right there, you know, and then they're not able to finish to completion because they've used so much of their Pell Grants on the basic general education courses, that they don't have enough money to pay for the next year. They can't afford to take a loan out, you know?
Yeah. Which,
So,
and that point just reminds me of one issue that I remember reading about because of the current crisis is that the issue of the term is like low income first generation students, or maybe it's flipped, but students who might not even be able to go back after this crisis, just because if it's like become such a big period of economic security and disruption, their ability to even finish the degree that they started becomes even more difficult.
well, that's definitely one thing I'm afraid of. I'll be honest. I'm part-time at Bristol, which is crazy to me considering what I do. It's one of the,
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's one of it, but it really is one of the most important things at the college, because there's just so many students who come to us day after day. I hear so many heartbreaking stories. I mean, there was a student who came to us, she needed food. She was going to Simmons College, and she dropped out. She couldn't cut it. So she registered at Bristol, and she said, I'm homeless. I'm living in my car because when I went back home, my mom changed the lock on the door.
Wow.
And I can't go back. So I'm living in my car, and I have no food. I don't have anywhere to go. So we gave her food, and she started crying. And of course I'm crying. My coworkers are crying. You know, it's tough work. It's mentally draining. It's very rewarding. Don't get me wrong. Sorry, I live near the hospital.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very rewarding. But I mean, the stories that I hear are just freaking heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So many like that. I mean, I could go on. But where was I going with that?
So one thing I'll use it.
Okay.
Yeah. Go and then I'll
So I'm part-time. And my position is not guaranteed. I'm not part of the union, unfortunately. And I worry that with low enrollment next year, which is what is projected, that I will not have a job, that I will be laid off, and I don't know if I'll be able to come back. I definitely worry about that, and so many of my coworkers are right now.
Yeah.
That's definitely a reality.
And that's really the long-term impact of if there isn't a significant federal bailout. I mean, that's really where we're moving here. And I know it's for everybody. You know, there's been $2 trillion, but I think we're going to need like $6 trillion by the end of this.
Yeah.
And significant, basically, here's a year and a half, 18 months worth of funding, because that's the kind of timeline we're talking about, especially at the colleges. In terms of enrollment and getting back to a place where we can do stuff and people feeling comfortable going to school.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's going to be a factor as well.
Yeah, because even like as we have discussions now about how long this will last,
right.
You have to think about like come September, like hopefully we're on the other side of this in September, but there's going to be like a slow coming back to normal. So,
right.
Like, how does the next academic year even start up?
Well, and I think that it's the question, and I think people have been asking this question across the board, right, of getting back to normal, right? That's almost like the pitch right now, so we just have to go back to normal. And I'm not trying to call you out because everybody says it and everybody wants it. I want it. Yeah. I want it to be 8 weeks ago right now.
Exactly.
Now, right? For a lot of reasons. But this a lot of what Amy was just describing was happening before this crisis.
Exactly.
The stories Amy was just sharing were from
Exactly.
before there was the biggest, fastest economic collapse in 80 years. You know, maybe it really has no analog because we've never been in a position like this before.
Mhm.
So, you know, the long-term impacts on people having jobs, either directly at the campuses or like Amy, or getting, you know, a degree to get a job, or going back to
Mhm.
school, or draining down Pell, or being unable to pay back student loans. Like I have a $300 a month payment, and I had average debt, right? So the
Yeah.
average debt, I was 30,000. The average is about 33,000, and the payment's 300 a month. So, you know, if half of everybody essentially is worse off than me, right? There's half of people are paying 450, 600, whatever. So, and maybe I'm actually a little bit below average now, and it's getting even worse. And I've had a few years of being able to pay it off. So,
Yeah.
you know, there's not people who aren't in that position, and this is just going to be, you know, 17 million unemployed, and a lot of them probably have student loans to pay. I mean, thank goodness there's relief, but if you have private loans or anything else, you're not going to pay it, and you might not be able to pay it even if we get back to normal, right? And that's why we cancel it.
And I think that captures the point so well, is that insofar as the kind of current pandemic and the economic fallout puts in sharp relief things, but it was already an emergency situation or a crisis situation for people before. This is just exacerbating all of those things that were already the case because of kind of the disruption and turmoil. One thing just here, what are some things that need to and can be done at both the state and federal level for addressing this long term? Because we need some of like short-term responses to help, like at least like some mitigating steps. But as you're saying, it was already a problem. And so what are some of the things that we should be advocating for to address the underlying issues?
Yeah, I mean, and that's this is actually a huge opportunity, right? We are in a massive crisis. We're at an inflection point. If we don't do anything, things that we care about, like community colleges, won't be what they are supposed to be anymore. And like that's been happening slow motion for 30 years. That's what we've been fighting. Now it's happening all at once right now, and everybody can see it. So I think the real key for this moment, you know, our two big asks are immediate and long term, right? It's fully fund public colleges and reimburse them for these expenses, but that actually means let's fight for a really big federal bailout. Maybe we can actually get 18 months of funds and try to reset some stuff, or have something left over, not just spend this on this emergency and then be right back where we were at the beginning. But you know, so we have those things that they're in there mixed in with our short term, and some of them even, you know, campuses are going to need money soon too. So, you know, some of them are perpetually evergreen asks. But you know, the big thing I think that the state can do is really take some action to protect student borrowers. We know that the state can't cancel debt on its own, but you can protect student borrowers from 5 calls a day. You can implement the Student Loan Bill of Rights. You can give people some dignity and some opportunities to try to rectify what they can at the state level. There's the state could take additional action beyond the federal level around payments of private student loans. And that could be both now and in the future, short-term and long-term. And then the two big long-term things are really investing in our campuses so that we can have 4 Amy's who are full-time Amy's helping people who need help, and not a half-time Amy who's worried about her job and working more than half-time for free. You know, that's funding our future. That's the Cherish Act, what we were advocating for 8 weeks ago before we were advocating for crisis support.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the Cherish Act is that PHENOM has been advocating before? This kind of shows why it's so important, especially as legislators try to cut stuff out of the budget. That higher education funding is something that shouldn't be cut more because it's already too low.
Yeah, so the higher education funding has been cut by 33% just since 2001, even more significantly since the 70s. When we were just finishing building all of our colleges, we kind of built them and then started defunding them immediately. But you know, it would restore that funding and say that these are community colleges, community resources, and that in a state like ours, we really need well-resourced community and state and, you know, UMass system, state universities and UMass campuses. So it would restore the funding since 2001, at least make us whole there, and then keep doing that in the future, and also freeze tuition and fees at the level they are now, as long as that funding commitment is met. So that's kind of a stop the bleeding. And then we really need to move to debt-free, really investing even more than that to not just invest back in the service level like the Cherish Act, but actually then shift the cost and say, shift the cost back to the state. The state used to pay, now students and families are paying, and it's struggling, and there's really no affordable option. This is the public system where people are struggling to pay. There's nothing but beyond that. So saying that public higher education should be debt-free for everybody. Free is really what we believe, debt-free and free. You don't need to borrow it to go. And that should be what the state does. And that's actually the return on investment for that, and the benefit for the state, for the economy, for people across the board. Like, it's a win-win-win, except for maybe a few very small percentage of people who we will have to tax to actually fund that. So, helping millions by taxing 100 people is a pretty good deal, I think.
Yeah, especially those people have far too much money. And the one thing even that I've seen that given the patchwork in funding that currently exists at different levels, it's not even as expensive as many people make it out to be to shift to actually making things different. You'll obviously need more money, and as you noted, we have enough rich people in Massachusetts to get the money. But even just putting together resources that are already allocated and then using that to push them over, it's something that's actually quite feasible.
Right.
Yeah, it is. We give half of our state scholarship money to students at private colleges right now. So there's tens of millions of dollars right there that, could go to the public system.
Yeah, and even it just speaks to even some of the stories that I've been seeing now of Ivy League universities that are talking about laying people off or hiring freezes, despite they're having tens of billion dollars in endowments, which just also just speaks to that general inequality in the higher education sector.
And I think too, again, if Amy might be able to speak to it, the biggest inequity, even within public higher education, there's inequity for the community colleges versus UMass Amherst. And
Yeah, before I get into that though, back up on your last question, you asked what could be done. And for me, the number one thing that could be done first and foremost, and Zach, I'm going to go there, is that our legislators could actually listen to us. Because if we're paying $100,000, $50,000, whatever the case may be, in student loan debt, and we go to the State House and we're there for Public Higher Education Advocacy Day, and we're sitting in your office and we're trying to talk to you and we're trying to have a conversation with you and say, hey, I'm struggling to pay my student debt and I'm working 3 jobs and I'm a single parent, or I'm a traditional age student and I have to pay for my own education and I'm working 3 jobs. How dare some of these legislators sit in their offices and come in and put on this front and give us a story to set up the mood to say, the nurse, these people from the nursing home organization just came in and, this is a very vulnerable population and, they need money too. And that's really important, and that sets the tone for the entire thing as these people really deserve money more than you do. And I don't really care what you have to say. And that's exactly what happened to us on Public Higher Education Advocacy Day when we went to Senator Roderick's office. And I wasn't happy about it. And he even, went as far as to blame PHENOM to say that how dare we not accept his proposal of cutting student services. And yes, maybe freezing the fees, but also putting it on the backs of staff who are already part-time and can't afford it, which is what PHENOM was created for, to stop things like that, to keep community colleges as community colleges. So when you ask what can be done, that's the first and foremost thing, is for them to listen to us, because how dare a lot of these legislators sit there and pretend, to care, and put on this facade. That's one thing that I'm just really sick of. It's a lot of work to get a bus full of students up from a community college, okay? Let me tell you, because a lot of them, they're out that door and they're going to work, they're picking their kids up from school. So I have, me and my organizers, student organizers, we have to do a lot of work to get these students to get on that bus and say, hey, you know, this is really important. We want you to advocate for your education. And they're ready to go and they're ready to do that, and they're dismissed, you know? So that's my number one thing.
No,
right
and it's a
and
great
then,
point
of course,
because like legislators, they're elected by you. Their job is to represent you. They're paid by you, and they should
that's
by
right.
that actually listen.
Right.
Right.
And I also just want to add, you know, the day that we're the powerful enough group that it's our fault that anything happened, I am all in. Like, let's get there. So, you
This
know,
big public higher education student lobby.
scary. One of my favorite stories is Advocacy Day 2018, and Pat Talen's quoted in the story calling me a low-paid lobbyist.
Lovely.
Very true.
Nice.
Yeah, I think after our sit-in, they weren't we made a little bit of noise, you know. So, but hey, that's good.
It's what you need to be doing. One thing that I've been curious about as well, and this goes to before we were talking about the shift to online classes, is that even since, I think this goes even back to when I was in college, like a decade ago now, where a number of universities have seemed to see a push to online as an opportunity to shed costs by like reducing how much they have to pay faculty, reducing how much they have to invest in space, and then likely then pulling back on services that they would need to offer students as they, let's say, like deterritorialize a campus, where they can view it as less of an actual space with support, with interaction, and just kind of get people to pay you for a lot less. What do you see as like coming out of this if that push from let's say, the higher ed administration would be greater, and how to push back against that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge question, huge problem. You know, the forces of privatization don't take a disaster off, and like this is going to be classic disaster capitalism or shock doctrine types things, however you want to put it. There's already been a push to online, and we know, you know, for all the reasons you said, it's definitely cheaper, and it seems very clear, you know, if we're pushing. Let me put it this way. I guarantee you Harvard's going to have a full class of brick and mortar classes next year, no matter what, you know, or whichever year we're back for health. When the health emergency is over, they're going right back to campus because they know that that's the best experience possible. That's what education is. And when we say, let's go online, let's make it easier, I'm not against an online option. I'm sure there's people who take it. There's options out there. It helps people. Having a hybrid model where you can have some on campus, some off campus, you know, that's fine. I think they should be paid the same. The educators should be paid the same. I think the classes should cost the same. In some cases, online, like the you have less resources going into it, but it's priced even higher than a class on campus, right? So it's even expanding the profit margin. And, you know, basically what we're saying, and again, we were saying this before, and they're going to use it as this is crisis as an excuse to try to do it. You're saying if you're poor, you get online classes, and if you're rich, you get to go to college. That's what it ends up being at the end of the day. And yeah, I think it would be a disaster at the moment. And this is the moment, right? Like Massachusetts, 50% of people have a bachelor's degree. 75% of jobs require a degree of some kind. This is the time when we need people with soft skills, communication, social skills, the ability to interact in group learning and team-based like stuff, and having that credential, because 3/4 of the jobs require it. The idea to pull back and do less at that moment in a place like this, in 30 years, we'll see the consequences of that. And you don't have to be a college graduate to get it. So.
All right.
And
most of my classes were online because I had to work. I had 2 or 3 jobs on campus, and I had one off of campus, and I had to do online classes. That was the only way that I could make it work, you know?
Right.
So good point, Zach.
Well, and that's the thing. It's, you know, it's, if college was cheaper and you could have one job on campus and pay for that and pay your rent, then you get in-person classes. So, and I had I took one online class one time. I had 4 years of in-person classes.
Yeah, I want nothing more than to have an in-person class, but it's just it's not feasible in today's economy, unfortunately, for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's important that like online courses can be an important supplement for people, but should basically, but like the in-person needs to be, let's say, the grounding of the grounding of the university.
Right.
Right.
One thing that I've been thinking of a lot recently, especially as somebody who lives both where my apartment and my office are both in college-centric areas, is the census. Because the census, which is kind of going on now, where we figure out how many people live in all these areas, in the time that census letters were mailed out to people were the same time that colleges were telling students, you're out. Do you have any sense of what's going on to make sure that, let's say, these kind of places, like these kind of cities and towns where there is a large student population that might not be living there currently, can still be accurately counted? Because if suddenly, like for instance, like a place like Amherst, if all those students are out, suddenly Amherst's population looks a lot lower than Amherst's population is. And the same for any other kind of largely, let's say, like somewhat like a residential college.
Yeah. I mean, Amy, is there, I think it might be different for community colleges, or is it even something that's in the minds of folks right now?
Well, for us, yeah, I mean, for us down here, we don't have dorms.
Right.
There is some very, very little housing offered for a pilot program at UMass Dartmouth and at Bridgewater State, although they aren't there right now. But yeah, mostly everybody is in an apartment down here and has some kind of housing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could even in that case also just get to the issue of colleges could be places of, like, when you're trying to do like something like to counting everybody who lives near there accurately, being on campus makes it easier to make sure that people did in fact fill out.
Oh yeah,
right.
We had
those points of contact, or can
yeah.
have events of getting people to make sure that they are counted. Stuff where it becomes a completely like kind of removed from that physical space dynamic, or like kind of that social space, physical space, that becomes more difficult to make sure everybody in the larger community is actually being counted, so that
Oh yeah,
get the resources it needs.
most definitely. I mean, we had the Census Bureau at least 3 days a week before we closed officially, just getting students to sign up for jobs to work the census, and
Yeah.
that's not happening now, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that definitely would have been a major platform for people to be able to take the census and have access to it. And we had some classes that were going to do like a service learning type thing, and I'm not sure if that's continuing or not, because I'm not sure how they're going to do that remotely with, you know, COVID-19 and everything going on. I'm sure that's going to affect it, unfortunately, in a big way.
Yeah.
Right. I do have some, you know, answers on a more general level, and for the residential campuses. So 3 things with the census. One, you can fill it out online. That's really the way to do it. Try to find, if you lost a piece of mail, try to get it, or figure out what you have to do to get the code to fill out the census. The real push here right now is to get it done online, so we're not asking for people to go to people's houses during this emergency, because that's what the alternative is. So that's just everywhere. That's just a census thing everywhere. But for the residential campuses, there is actually, this is one thing where there has been real partnership on this, which is the Census Bureau has been working across the country with residential college campuses to basically do data sharing and information sharing. So if you basically providing lists of residents in dorms, using that, I'm not sure exactly if the plan is to use that as replacement data or not, for the actual collection of census. I don't even know if that is technically, you know, the census is one of the few things we've been doing since 1790. So it has some archaic restrictions around it. But you know, there is a real partnership there where the census at the very least should be able to say, we know there were this many people on campus this day, so this is, you know, how we have to get, and we'll have their contact information and that kind of stuff. I think there might even, I'd have to go back and I don't want to misrepresent, I think there might even be a thought of using some of it as a replacement because of the displacement of those students. So that has been a thing. And the Census Bureau generally is just like, you know, although I think we'd prefer better leadership and supervision at this moment. The civil servants who have been working there since long before this president was the president, are very good at this. So that's been one. Census is clicking a little bit, at least, trying its best.
That's good. And then one thing, I'll just build off a point that I made earlier for kind of like wrapping up. As I noted, that like it's going to be like a major kind of like, let's say, a budget crunch, where like what Amy said, a lot of legislators are probably going to try to pit different constituencies against each other for funding. How can we best push back against that in the coming months to make sure that like, no, we do still need to be full in public higher education, because noted, education should be treated as a fundamental right.
So I was told by a senator that shall be unnamed that he doesn't bother answering emails at all because it's really a waste of his time, and he thinks that there's no thought behind it. So phone calls to your legislators are the best and most effective way, in my opinion. We do have petitions that have been going around, which is great, but phone calls are and always will be, besides visiting the State House physically, are still the best way to go about things. However, with the MCAS vote that just went out, was it this week? I don't even know, the days are running together at this point, but I tried calling Jeff Riley. His voicemail was full. There was a couple of people I called, and their voicemail was full. So there's some flaws in the system. And some of the reps, they don't even state like, hi, this is, state rep so-and-so. It's their chief of staff of her or whoever. And for me, I feel like that's just confusing constituents even further. And perpetuating this cycle of citizens not really fully being involved in the process, which is unfortunate. Yeah. No, and the one point that you made reminded me of one thing I had often heard from friends back in college who had been interning on Capitol Hill, about the fact that emails are fine, but especially if an informed email, a lot of legislators do just ignore, or it gives them an excuse to ignore, even though they should still read every communication that they get. A phone call has more weight because you put more time into it. You have to actually pick up your phone. You're spending time talking on the phone, and going in person is another step more, because it in a way shows with each additional degree, like whether or not you can out hustle them. Because if you can how much of a threat you are to them kind of almost indicates how much of a threat you can be to them in like the electoral space as well. However, it's unfortunate because not last year, but the year before, I brought a student to the State House, and he's autistic, and he's very open about it, and he has an organization, and he advocates for other students who are autistic, and he's extremely intelligent. And he came with me to the State House one day, and same senator who told me that email was essentially just not worth his time. He was really upset because he said, I'm autistic and I struggle immensely with social interactions, and for me, email is the best way to communicate. So it's unfortunate to hear a legislator say something like that, because you're not taking into consideration constituents who may be differently abled and not able to field that phone call,
Right. And
you
just
had one to tag in.
Yeah, I mean, just, I think in terms of getting to them, the petitions are a good start. One good thing about them is it does help us get your data, and then we can call you and try to get you to call them. So that's a virtuous cycle there. But, I think on a bigger picture, not just in terms of how can we advocate for what we're thinking about, but, you're really talking about this like descending into a den of snakes, pack of wolves, whatever you want to call it, right? Like competing over the scraps. This is not a state of scraps. This is a state of immense wealth, number one. But even beyond that, this is a nation of immense wealth. And I think that what we as a state can do, and I don't have hope that this will happen right now, because I can fight every hour, every day to do this, and I can't make it happen on my own, or even with maybe a lot of people, would be for Senate President Spilka and Speaker DeLeo and Governor Baker, and that's one group, and also for us in the progressive movement, to say this is going to be the need out of this. this is a people's budget, a people's bailout. I know Sunrise Movement has been pushing this people's bailout and really saying, here's the accounting, here's what we will need just to keep and make everyone whole. And then say, federal government, you better do this. You have to do this. And I mean, if every state across the country, if we could really get a number for everybody across the country and say, this is the bailout that states need, this is the bailout that colleges need. I mean, that's what has to be done here. And I don't know that it will happen. And I know that people are organizing around it and we'll push things and we'll get it closer and we'll make it better and we'll get what we can. But, you know, the scope of this crisis, I think, is not fully imaginable. You know, there's the trauma and the social impact, and then there's the economic impact. I don't think we've come to terms with it yet. And I hope that in a month, I mean, we're talking about 17 million people on unemployment in 3 weeks. It's, I went to school for economics. I haven't found an economist who thinks this is not the most beyond the pale moment ever. And so I'm not hopeful, given the track record, that we will come together as a state leadership. I'm a little more hopeful that the progressive side will do that. I think we've done a lot of that already. I've seen a lot from Progressive Mass, from Community Labor United, from MEJA, and PHENOM. We've really put out these multi-pronged, agendas. I think getting everybody even more on the same page, so that at least we're not fighting each other when they try to pit us against each other. That's at least something that we can do and show that solidarity. And hopefully we can set an example for our state leaders to also say, let's not make this about 6 billion cut, but about why we're going to the federal government saying we need 6 billion because these are people's lives and we can't cut them. So.
Well said. So since I don't want to keep you past like an hour mark as we're approaching, final comments from either of you for those who are watching.
Now, fight now, like keep fighting. This is a moment to make calls, to try to contact people, especially if you are at home and you're worried about money or can't donate. Like, you can donate your time, you can donate a phone call, you can try to fight for systemic action. If you can't go out and help, on a food line, I live with my parents and I'm worried about, being out there. So I've been trying to make phone calls. And if you can't, or if you're really just of the mind, I really think advocacy is where we need to be. It's definitely where we're going to need to be in 2 months. But if you still are on the direct service, I think Amy, we talked about higher ed, that's what this is about, but there's mutual aid in communities, networks of people coming together. In Medford, we've been, folks have been calling every senior in town to check in. Really just networks where you can help in any way that you can. So there's stuff for immediate mutual aid and community support. And then really, our goal here, we've put out our demands, we've set our agenda, and now we're waiting for, this is the cut, and really trying to get people mobilized to fight back. So definitely from PHENOM and from education, we'll be trying to ramp people up in a few weeks when this picture becomes clearer.
Nice. And Amy,
Amen to that. Yeah, I started a South Coast Mutual Aid, which is not just for my city of Fall River, but also the surrounding towns, because I haven't seen anybody step up in those areas either. So I decided to kind of include those as well. And let me tell you, I've been organizing for a couple of years now, and that was a whole nother level of organizing. I feel like I've achieved a whole nother organizer level, like badge somewhere on my profile. Yeah, it's crazy. But I've got a good crew of community members who've stepped up. I've got an intern right now that I scored from Bristol, because the remote work thing is really hard for an intern. That's a whole nother subject we didn't even touch on, is that a lot of our students have internships that they're not able to do, like our nursing program and our culinary program and those kind of programs where they're probably not going to finish this year because that field work that's necessary they don't have, which is really unfortunate. So hopefully they'll be refunded, and we'll figure things out along the way. In addition to that, I just wanted to have a moment of silence for the death of Bernie Sanders' campaign, because I'm still in a grieving mood. But I think that we all can agree that even with Bernie dropping out, you know, there was a lot of noise made throughout that campaign. I mean, it started with it, you know, in 2016, but I think this year he really stepped things up, well, between last year and this year. And you just saw so many young people come out who decided to care for the first time. I worry about where we're going to be for the presidential election in November, no doubt. But I hope that those progressive movements created by Bernie running continue. I'm hopeful that it will bring about more change. I'm hoping, especially in public higher ed, for sure. And it's a tough time that we're in. I think we're all struggling. Everybody I talk to, we're all struggling in one way or another. And I think the best thing we can do is just all be in it together, and help each other out. And like Zach said, it's important for all the other organizations, you know, for PHENOM and all the other organizations to reach out and explain, you know, what we're advocating for and to jump on. And I think PHENOM's done a good job with that. I mean, we really showed up for No 1 2. We definitely showed up for the Promise Act, which ended up being the Student Opportunity Act that got passed. You know, we were definitely there. And I'm hoping that, you know, going forward in the future, a lot of organizations will come out and support us and be in the fight with us, because without people, you know, in our corner, we're not going to get too far, you know?
Yeah.
So we're trying, we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. So I'll end it there. And,
the keep fighting message is an important message to note on. So I'll just say, like Zach and Amy, I'll say thank you so much for joining today, and thank you for the amazing work that PHENOM does and will continue to do. PHENOMonline.org, his website was phenomonline.org/coronavirus. Have the list of demands and various actions that people can take. And yeah, thank you again so much for joining this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. It was really good to have you. Or you have us. I don't know. You're in my home. I don't know.
No, you're in the state house.
Yeah, exactly.